So for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I propose that we have a break from working with animals in art, and I'd like to propose that we make the theme working with figures in interior spaces. So I've come to the new museum, and I'm going to start by doing some studies of the architecture of the space. I'm going to choose some different locations around the museum, and I'm going to make some simple drawings, initially just using lines, using a biro. But even before that, I'm going to start with my viewfinder. So the familiar wasp's cutout window. And I think when I look at this view here, I think there's at least two possibilities. So, this new museum interior is, in a way, it's very abstracted. The older kind of Victorian wing of the museum is full of decorative spaces and decorative architecture. Here, the architect has really gone for these very simple, bold, geometric, almost abstracted shapes. So that can help the artist, I think. But when I look at this view, which is a wide, complicated view, I think I can see two possibilities. One is over this side, and if I look through my viewfinder, try and use my viewfinder as a way of editing what's there, and I think I would want to use the staircase and something of the view heading off into the distance. The other view, I think, is over this side, and that's getting all that sort of perspective of the receding lines, the converging lines of the wall, heading off into the distance to some sort of cafe. So I'm going to begin, for the project, what I want to demonstrate to you firstly is making some of these notes, drawing initially, as I say, with line, and I'm going to try with biro. But I'm hoping that the project can develop towards working with a model next week with various poses and looking at putting figures into interiors. So when I draw this museum space, I'm also going to make a few notes about some of the figures that I see. They're moving and they're not modelling for me, but I will be able to make some notes about them. So let me just divide my page in half. And there we go. I'm going to work with this sort of vertical view and begin. I think I've probably got a fairly shaky hand here, so we won't get many straight lines. But I want to get, I could try a continuous line, but I think that might be more than is humanly possible. But what I do want to do is make a drawing that is almost entirely line. So I'm just getting something off the staircase. And of course, you will have experienced the benefit of working just with line. I think from the point of view of what we might be doing, thinking about compositions, the line is going to give us it's going to create space when we work with bits of perspective. So I think that's always valuable to sort of test your ability with perspective. So line is going to give us some perspective, which will help create space. Whoops-a-daisy, sorry. But it's also going to create a structure for this composition. And sometimes just reducing everything to line, it's very satisfying, to see how you can use converging lines to create perspective, how you can identify what are the more important lines which will create the space for your composition. But also I think to then view that space and the part that the lines play in it, almost the way a theatre director might look at a stage and think, right, where am I going to put people? Because as I draw now, off in the distance I've got a few silhouetted people in this very large doorway, which I haven't completely understood, but I can see that there is also a very nice sculpture in the distance, and behind that an archway which probably goes through to the animal section. So I think, although I've been a little bit shaky with my lines, I think I've created something of a space that's divided by this wall, and which leads off into the distance. Maybe the last thing I'll do to this particular one is I'll put in that line that runs down the middle and create some space. So I've only got one figure in the distance here. I would be quite keen to get a bigger figure over here, but nobody's appeared. So that's a start. I'm going to turn my board over and look in the other direction. So I decided to go for a different view because I thought the other one wasn't sufficiently different from the first. But again, I'm staying with my biro, and I'm just working with some lines, and these are, I suppose, make some points about perspective. So these lines, a line here at the top of that window, or at the base of the window, these lines, you can see they're converging, they're coming together as they move away into the distance. And so sometimes spotting some of that very simple perspective can help with creating the depth. And you'll see my lines are pretty shaky. They're not straight, but they are converging, and it's the converging that helps create the space. And I've got a cabinet here as well, and so within that, it's like that exercise of drawing buildings. This line is sloping down, this line is sloping up, and when they come together, they create that cube or box form. So I've ended up talking a little bit about perspective, but I also want to be thinking about what occupies this space. Eventually, hopefully, there'll be figures, but there are museum artifacts, which I'm just outlining as well. So I can populate my space with figures, or I can also put in objects, and it's the same task of the theatre director organising whatever it is on the stage set. And if there were figures that came and went, then I might want to introduce them as well, just to get a sense of scale. And following through, last of all, some of those lines which appear on the other side. So I've just worked with line, because I want to kind of identify the essential lines that will create the space. And as I say, if I can make observations about the size of figures, then I can put those together with drawings that I make from the model and begin to populate this stage with some protagonists. So this time I'm going to extend my line drawing technique by working with some thin sticks of charcoal and drawing on grey paper. But again, I'll just begin with my lines. I've got this opening here with the circular shield arrangement at the top. And actually, in relation to those shapes, I can also see I can get some figures in. So I'm beginning again with lines. Since I'm doing it on the grey paper, I'll then be able to put some white marks in as well, once I see exactly what else is going to be included. So we've got the head of a tomb here. So it's quite interesting to do the lines in this situation because it's a grey bit of paper. I don't have to do, it doesn't take long before space is created. But now that I've got the grey paper, I can also add some white marks to get more contrast. So there are certain shapes, darker shapes, that I might fill in. And because I'm trying to work mainly with line, I'll just do a little bit of hatching. And that means that my lines are still fairly clear. But having put them in, I might also then introduce the whiter marks. So that's the kind of space, and I've got some figures hinted at over here, and I might try just a little bit of white hatching. Where white's going to work. What's this? A foot. My white doesn't work. Let me stop that a sec. So that's a bit of sabotage. My white pencil is broken, and my white chalk doesn't seem to work. So I would have then started to use a little bit of light just to separate some of those spaces. And you know, the museum spaces are fantastically well lit, very dramatic. So for those who come on Monday and will work within the museum, I think there's a great choice of spaces to work with, but all, you know, with the idea of creating stage sets, for want of a better way of putting it, in which to place our figures. So I'm going to go and find one more. I think I'll go and find something really dark and see what I can make with that. So one review, and again starting with lines, this time using the charcoal. I'm doing that thing of sliding the side of the charcoal up and down the page, and that's a very quick way of creating reasonably straight lines and helping you introduce the geometry to the subject and deciding exactly which lines to select. And you can even hold them up and assess some of the angles that you're dealing with. This also reminds me a little bit of the project we did in the past on room to room, because it's possible here to look through doorways from one space into the next, and that should have some great potential for creating again the stage sets in which you might put figures or artifacts. So that's me just getting down a few lines to find this composition, and where possible, again maybe sliding my charcoal around, I can actually get a certain scale to these figures, and then I'll be able to translate that observation. You know, if I want to introduce figures that I've found using models in the studio, I can gauge their size in the composition against some of the notes I've made here of the figures in this interior experience. So that's still the grey paper. I could even get a little bit of perspective on the floor here, I think. And again, it's these converging lines, and then from that I might develop a pattern of light, which is a little bit confusing here because there's all sorts of things going on. There's a lot of light coming through the wall here. There's a kind of halo of light on this wall. But again, I think that would be quite nice as part of my composing of the space and how I'm going to actually manage the figures within that space using the light. And this is why I think the grey paper is so good, because you can quite quickly emphasize certain things, bring out certain areas and let others stay quiet, shaded. So wherever I introduce definition, or the definition of light and dark, that's where I create emphasis. So that I'm going to probably combine with my figures to give some direction to my composition. So I've managed to produce several drawings, the line-only ones where I've worked with the biro, exploring different spaces, and the ones where I worked with charcoal and chalk on grey paper, trying to use the side of the charcoal sometimes to generate straight lines. I made some notes as well, when possible, of some figures. There's one here and one in the distance there, so that I've got some sense of the scale of figures within these settings. And what I want to be able to go on to do, and to guide you in doing as well, then is developing compositions with figures in these interiors. And we're going to have a model next week in the studio who will give us different visitor to museum gallery poses. And then it'll be a really satisfying process of putting these elements together and perhaps using some of the techniques that we used last time, like the collage and the monoprinting, as a way of facilitating or generating ideas of how to put things together in a new and satisfying way. So I have taken lots of photographs of the new museum on Chambers Street, and I can send those out to you together with this video. And when we meet on Monday, it'd be good to look at some sketches that you might have managed to do. And I'd encourage you to try this line-only approach. It's challenging, but actually you start to see things differently. And I think certainly in terms of constructing compositions and getting a feel for how you manage figures within a space, it can be very helpful. Okay, well, see you tomorrow then. Bye-bye.